I think especially when people are giving money, they're not just giving money, their heart is involved. Where your treasure is, so your heart lies. People partner with need for a very little amount of time. People partner with vision for a long time. I think a lot of missionaries present their need, but rarely do missionaries present vision. And so I think the unique part about social media, everybody feels like preaching maybe has to be done in person setting, which I'm not negating that. I think you need to continue to gather. But when you look at the modern day pulpit, this has become the modern day pulpit. Your phone, it's the ability to witness and preach the gospel or to pray for people. There's people that have said, well, I just don't want to get famous. And I'm like, oh, you have to worry about that. You're not famous right now. But another question is, well, why not? If you ever read the scriptures, there's men and women that God exalted to great places of fame and notoriety, and those people use that fame and notoriety to push him higher. Fame by itself is necessarily destructive. It's when that becomes your identity.
Brian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us a little bit, while we're talking about social media today and how to use it, tell us a little bit about your journey with the organization, with how you guys got going on social media and how it's grown.
Prior to 2020, we didn't really do much on social media. Social media became something we did out of a desire to continue to preach the gospel during the pandemic. So it was never something that was at the forefront of our minds. We just knew if we don't pivot somehow, we're going to waste, 1-2 years, however how long it was going to be. Lo and behold, we've seen, God honor that, and we've seen millions hear the gospel every single month.
Yeah, and you guys have a huge presence on social media.
Yeah, it's been very unique since 2020, but it's grown, and a lot of our missionaries as well.
Yeah. Okay, so what would you say to missionaries who are listening, who are like, I don't know if I want to use social media? There's just so much evil and bad stuff on there. Can it really be used for good? Is it worth my time?
Yeah, I would ask them where they got that theology, that darkness is the excuse to not bring light on. It's interesting when you think about social media or the internet. I've heard people say, well, it's dark there, or, I'm not quite sure God can move, through Instagram. And my biggest pushback as well, do you believe someone can get addicted to pornography on social media? Do you believe that someone could commit suicide because of bullying? Well, if you acknowledge the demonic, then you have to acknowledge that the Holy Spirit can move as well.
Absolutely. When did you start to realize that social media could be this really powerful tool for sharing the gospel and for people here learning to use it in missions?
Yeah, 2020 for sure. I think prior to that, my Instagram was, pictures of people or, random stuff. I never thought my social media could be used, whether it's, was a funny meme or it was an actual serious video. There was a point where our missionaries were putting out about 4,500 videos a month between, maybe 25 of us. And we witnessed God do some wild things.
Okay, so share some of those wild things, because you were telling me a few beforehand.
I think one of the coolest stories that I remember was one of our guys, Tim. He's a missionary with Modern Day. He was posting, he has about 1.6 million on TikTok right now. And there was a video, it was a live he was doing, and this kid said, I'm going to kill myself, on his comment section. So Tim says, all right, everyone get off this live and go just bombard this guy with encouragement. So this guy just starts getting DMs from all these people. He ends up messaging Tim the next day saying, hey, I didn't kill myself. In fact, I had a dream last night. And I had a dream of a man appearing to me as Jesus. And you just hear stories like that, or our guys would start doing Zoom baptisms because we couldn't baptize in person during COVID. So we'd have kids, on Zoom, proper clothing, of course, fill up their bathtubs and, get in and dunk themselves in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So we witnessed a very unique thing take place in the digital space that we hadn't quite seen.
Yeah. How would you envision missionaries being able to share some of that type of content and impacting people in that way?
I think the unique part about social media, everybody feels like preaching maybe has to be done in person setting, which I'm not negating that. I think you need to continue to gather.
Yeah.
But when you look at the modern day pulpit, this has become the modern day pulpit. Your phone, it's the ability to to witness and preach the gospel or to pray for people. I also have found in the last 4 years, people who would not normally be invited to preach in a church. I remember this one particular guy in Kansas City who had a speech impediment. And, this is a guy, if I'm honest, would probably never get invited to preach on a Sunday morning, yet had tens of thousands following him on TikTok because his journey and story related to so many people that maybe wouldn't sit inside of a building. And he was preaching the gospel every single week.
Wow. I think you shared that story in Don't Scroll,
Yeah.
which was really powerful because you're right. It gives opportunities to people who might not otherwise have them.
Yeah, the grandmas, the moms. And I think, too, I was watching this thing the other day. It said there's this old Mexican grandma who puts a little phone up and records her cooking, and she has more views than Martha Stewart. And why? I think is people are just done with polished content. They want reality. They want to know what really happens and takes place. And I think that's a beautiful part about social media is, this is a beautiful studio, but you don't need high production like this if you're on your phone making content.
It's true. I'm glad that you pointed that out because I think sometimes people hold themselves to this standard of like, well, I don't have all the right equipment and I can't do this and I can't do that. My mother-in-law has a YouTube cooking channel also, and she's killing it. I mean, I'm like, you don't need to have all the stuff that people think you need to have. You just got to be willing.
Yeah.
And there's something about that rawness, that authenticity. How would you say you prioritize coming across authentic in a space that is so often filtered?
I don't feel like I think the simple way to answer that is I don't feel like there's not multiple versions of me. So I don't have like a stage me, house me, a social media me. There's just me, I'll just, who I am, and the same jokes I'll tell at home, I'll tell them on a stage or on camera. So I think the authenticity piece is not so much of, what do you have to do to produce that as much as you just being who God's called you to be and trust that. Trust that whether it's 25 people or it's 200,000 people, that's your video. It reaches who it needs to reach.
What is your thought process when you think, what is the type of content I'd like to create?
I think that you find your niche. For me, preaching in high schools, I preached in high schools for 12 years. I became a king of one-liners. You might see some of those in my book.
There's some really good ones, I have to say.
I think that came because I would be in schools with kids. I remember this one kid in Compton. He was like, I don't believe in God. And I says, well, why not? And he goes, well, I never seen him. So I grabbed my iPhone. I go, well, do you believe in my phone? He goes, well, yeah, I can see it. And I said, well, have you ever met Steve Jobs? He goes, who's that? I said, the creator of the iPhone. He goes, no, I never met him. I said, so you've never met the creator, but you met his creation. It's these one line. Like for me, it was these wild truths that were simplified in the smallest packages. And for other people, I knew one girl who blew up famous. I knew her when she had no followers. She's famous from reading the Bible with her finger. She wouldn't even show her face. She would just record her finger and read the Bible. I just think God breathed on it and it was powerful.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, you brought up a word which I think is really important, and that's that famous or, notoriety or having lots of followers. How does somebody embrace social media? And then if they have some type of explosion or growth, even if it's a little bit, how do you keep your pride in check? How do you keep the focus on Jesus instead of getting that dopamine hit from every like that somebody's given you?
Well, I can't speak for everybody. For me, I don't think, number one, I don't think I'm famous, but I think if I had any sort of following of any sort, what always has kept me humble is my humanity, is I don't ever believe my own hype. And I don't believe, it's funny, we did an event a couple of years ago, and this guy comes up to me, he goes, man, that was a powerful event. You must have fasted for like 40 days. I said, no, I haven't fasted in a while, man. I said, I could probably use a good fast though. There's just this embracing that I feel like I've had of my humanity that makes me deeply appreciate his divinity. And I think that's where a lot of people, they miss it. They somehow think, there's a saying we have in One Voice, if God doesn't heal someone that you pray for, it's not your fault. And if God heals them, it's not your fault. It's not your fault either way.
Yeah. Well, even I think to your newest book, Legends Die Young, which
Mhm.
is outstanding. We were talking about that one earlier too. In the book, you really reference talking about somebody who's a legend or famous or however you want to call it are people who sacrifice, who lay down their lives.
Mhm.
So it's about being willing to let go of things, not add things on.
Absolutely. I think to me, social media is powerful because it's a great equalizer.
Yeah.
Prior to, I mean, I'm a millennial. So my generation I grew up in the celebrity pastor generation. You had the cool sneakers, the cool pics of Justin Bieber. You were the cool pastor. What the great equalizer of today is, I just officiated a wedding a few years back of two young people who the guy had at 18 years old, 19 million followers. His whole wedding was paid for, sponsors. So what does a guy with 19 million followers at 18 years old care for a pastor who has 50,000 followers or even a church of 4 or 5,000? So when fame is so obtainable in today's generation that the currency is not fame, it's authenticity. For a lot of these guys, do I know people that you would say are famous? Yeah, I know famous people. And do I ever take pictures? No. Do I ever, go and hang out with them and say, hey, can I get your signatures? No, I want to be their friend. I want to,
Mhm.
I want to experience who they are outside of that limelight.
Yeah. And so then that's not really the goal when you're getting on social media is to get this massive following. If the Lord does that, so what is the goal? What would you say to a missionary who's maybe, I don't know, they've got like 100 followers and maybe a month later they've got 120 and they feel discouraged. And is what I'm creating, does it even matter? Is anyone even hearing it?
If your goal is fame, you've missed it. But the goal to me is simple. It's to make them known. I mean, I also think on the flip side, there's people that have said, well, it's always funny. It's always people that aren't, don't have any followers. Like, well, I just don't want to get famous. And I'm like, I don't think you have to worry about that right now. You're not famous right now. But, the other question is, well, why not? I mean, if you ever read, the scriptures, there's men and women that God exalted to great places of fame and notoriety. And those people use that fame and notoriety to push him higher. And so I don't think fame it's by itself is necessarily destructive. It's when that becomes your identity or you let that, really shape who you are.
Mm.
And, again, talking about humanity, I think when you embrace that you need Jesus just as much as the person you're preaching to, whether you're saved for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, keeps you grounded.
And if you're obsessed with what people think about you with 50 followers, you're going to be obsessed with what people think about you with 500,000 followers.
I think if you're obsessed at 50 followers, you're just obsessed in general. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I mean, I think people say, well, I've had pastors that are like, well, I don't know if I want my leaders to get on social media because they have pride. I say, your leaders had pride long before they got on social media. So if social media is only a magnifying glass of what's already there.
Isn't that the truth? And I love it. We didn't even plan on talking about
Mm.
this today, but I love that we went there because I do think that's a scary thing for people. I reflect back to a conversation I had with a gal, this was years ago, who had this unbelievable voice. I mean, she could sing as well as anybody I've ever heard. And she used it for a long time.
Mhm.
But I remember she got to a point where she just disappeared one day. And I hadn't heard from her maybe 5, 6 years and ran into her somewhere. And we started talking about it. And she just said, well, I got into pride. And so it just freaked me out. And I didn't want to do that. And so I pulled back. And you never heard from her again. She completely disappeared. And I always felt so sad about that because I think there's that extreme of pride of blowing up and getting famous. And suddenly you pretend it's all about Jesus, but it's not. But then there's the other side of hiding under a bushel, burying your talent in the ground and disappearing. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's got to be somewhere in the middle. But it's good we touched on it because I do think for any missionary who's going into anything public, any type of social media, or I mean, even preaching on a Sunday, you got to check your heart. But don't use it as an excuse to not
Absolutely.
use the talent God's put in your hand. So we've got the side of using social media to spread the gospel that we've talked about. You also know about this other side, and that's that side of connecting with your supporters, the people who are I mean, you've got a ministry too, people who sow into you and give into you. How have you guys used social media to connect with that type of audience?
I don't know if it's a direct, like we're making videos for them, although we've done that before, recaps.
Yeah.
I just think we have a consistent updating of what's going on,
Okay.
and it allows us to, um, it allows us to, keep people along in the journey. I think especially when people are giving money, they're not just giving money; their heart is involved. Where your treasure is, so your heart lies. And I think when the heart stays encouraged, yeah, I don't remember who said this. People partner with need for a very little amount of time. People partner with vision for a long time. I think a lot of missionaries present their need,
Mm,
but rarely do missionaries present vision. And so I think, hey, I need, $100 for rent. I mean, that's great, but that might work 2 or 3 times. Or you do the whole social media, bail me out. Here's my Cash App, Zelle, help me, And I just think if I'm an investor, I'm not going to put my money into somebody that seems so unstable.
yeah,
How the missionaries have to see themselves as, are you actually a good investment
that's
for people?
good.
Because those people work hard for their money.
Okay, so practically, what are some of the best ways that you are presenting vision, getting that across?
I don't, I do my best to not raise money out of need. When you raise money out of need, you raise it desperately,
Yeah.
and it's not an investment. Um, I also just am very clear now. I don't, I mean, I'm so thankful. I mean this because some of things the wrong way. I'm thankful for prayer partners. I'm thankful for that. They're amazing. I'm also equally grateful for 25 a month, 50 a month, 100 a month. And I have no problem now reaching out to someone and saying, hey, we're reaching 78 countries. We have Jesus clubs in 47, states. Will you give to X, Y, and Z? And if not, that's okay. I mean, I literally tell people, I love you. Can just give me a yes or a no.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a limbo. And I just don't have a problem with that because I'm going to save their time, my time. And yeah,
And when you present that on social media, what do you find is connecting with people the most, like visuals or infographics or stories or
I think you, you are the biggest. I feel like people they don't really care much for, I mean, if I post something, it's a graphic or a picture, man, I get horrible engagement. If I post something that's funny, I mean, my page, if you go to my page right now, it's so random on Instagram. I got random memes and random stuff. And that's just kind of been the season I've been in of just wanting to make people laugh,
yeah.
you know? Um, I'll probably go back soon to posting something that might be a little bit more serious for some people, but I don't know. I think social media has been something I've experimented with. And I think people connect sometimes some of the most randomest things that strikes their heart. I think the other pitfall that people fall into is posting something that's relevant to them, but not considering the audience. If I post, I don't know, snapshot of some, eating somewhere, no one cares about that. So I just think does your page actually meet the need of someone, or are you speaking to your audience that you have?
How have you found storytelling to be something that's valuable in the social media content you share?
I'm a spiritual son of Lou Engle, 13 years, and I've learned one thing from Lou: tell stories. And he teaches that the Jewish culture doesn't see history like Americans. We see history as linear, and the Jews see history as circular. It's why they would retell the stories of Exodus to the next generation, believing that the breakthrough then would be just as effective now. And in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word became flesh. And when you don't tell stories, religion loves to make flesh become word. But telling stories shows people that God is alive and active today, not just 2,000 years ago in the Bible. So I think sharing stories is very powerful. I think how you share them, bringing people into your journey. Whenever I tell a story, you probably read in my books, but when I tell stories, I bring people into what the smells were like, or, where we don't want to talk about growing up and the abuse I went through. I bring people into what it was like to be a 6-year-old boy shaking in his room, breaking his toys. You bring people into your realities, and it connects their heart. I preached at a Westmont University, a very prestigious university in Montecito, very wealthy. And they wanted me to preach on missions. There's about 1,000 kids. And before I went up, I asked the leaders, I said, well, is chapel? I said, was everybody saved? And they're like, no. The guy was joking. He goes, no, not really. Anyone that's on the floor, yes. But all the other people sit in the smoker section in the bleachers. I said, well, can I do something a little different? They said, yeah. So I opened up the message by telling the story of my sister who was sex trafficked and put on fentanyl, who detoxed on my couch for 5 days. And it was this instantaneous pin drop in the room. And it was probably the first time ever a chapel had experienced such stories of reality that is so disconnected for their lives. Yet it's the real reality of what people go through. I talked about my sister detoxing. I talked about her face beaten black and blue from her boyfriend who tattooed his name on her face. And, watching that, an altar call that day, I watched people from the smoking section of the bleachers come down. It's a power of storytelling. You bring people into your life because they would, none of you guys were there and watching were there, in 2000, and was 23. But when I tell my story, I'm bringing you there with me.
I appreciate about the way that you tell stories is you always bring yourself into the stories too. Because I've heard pastors share stories before about other people, and they just don't seem to have the same impact as when it's someone they know or they were a part of the story. You said it earlier, people want to hear from you. They want to know, how did you feel? Where were you? What did you see? Because they're connected with you, not just with some random. You can read a wild random story anywhere online, but when you're a part of the story, I mean, it just carries that much more authority, and I think it evokes emotion. And when you evoke emotion, I think people want to respond.
And I think just as many stories that I have that are encouraging, I have 1,000 discouraging ones. I mean, I could write another 3 books on my discouraging moments, my failures moments. I miss God's voice. I mean, that's an equal part of Christianity. In my book, Legends Die Young, I have a whole chapter on disappointment because there is not a lot of theology around disappointment. So you have people that are falling away. Like you just said, what do? I make a page and I thought God told me it would reach the world and you had 220 followers. It's because people aren't being taught how to embrace disappointment or how to embrace waiting. I mean, I've been doing high schools for 15 years and barely now am I seeing fruit. But the theology of waiting or, again, navigating disappointments or pains or offenses, which is prevalent on social, those things need to become more prevalent in culture. If not, people miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're deciding what to share, how do you decide how vulnerable to be? Because as you know, there's people on social media who also overshare. How do you share just the right amount?
I mean, I'm as vulnerable, I think, as they come. I mean, I've shared of the abusive. I grew up in an abusive home, 10 years, watched my mom get beat. And no, my father's not that mad anymore today. And there's been forgiveness and reconciliation. But it was my reality. I think for me, there's a difference between, it's not so much being too vulnerable as much as your motivation of your vulnerability. Is my motivation to bring healing or is my motivation to get people on my team? I mean, I talk about that in my book too, where it's funny how if you got someone who's offended at a church, they leave it to go to another church. They always seem to find the other offended people that left their churches. It's like this grouping thing that takes place. And instead of each other bandaging their wounds, they only make them worse. And that's, to me, I think there are certain things that need to be processed outside of social media. The things that I process on social media, in my opinion, are things I've been healed from. I'm not getting healing in them. So I'm not processing my healing on social media. I'm speaking about not a wound, but a scar. And a lot of people speak on their wounds.
Yeah. So wait till it's a scar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. That point you brought out about why, what's your motivation? That's so huge because how many people are actually stopping and pausing to ask and then being honest with themselves. I'm posting this because I hope people think I look good in it. I'm posting this because I would like some affirmation. I feel a little lonely. And not that none of that ever creeps in. I mean, we're humanity. You talked about it earlier. There's the There's this shadow side, I think, to all of our personalities. So when you're posting it, yes, I'm posting this for the Lord. Is there a little piece of you that is hoping it gets a lot of likes because it feels kind of good? Yeah. But don't let that stop you, but don't let it be your primary. So why am I posting this? What am I hoping is going to happen? What a great question to ask yourself when you're getting ready to post something. Okay, so with your posts, you also have that evangelistic side to it too. So how do you decide what content to post when you're trying to reach Christians versus non-Christians?
I don't try to reach Christians or non-Christians. I feel like I'm the same.
Well, there you go.
So we had a discussion the other day with somebody about branding, and they were talking about, well, we don't want to brand too much. We don't want to win the loss. And I was like, I think that's really my generation, millennials. I remember there was this culture of do not mention Jesus, is trying to create everything that was, Jesus was like, the secret spy within everything. And then Kanye West comes out with his album, Jesus is Lord. And you're just like, dang, like we've spent decades trying to become seeker sensitive. I mean, even the Jesus clubs, which is our ministry, why do we call it that? Because we don't believe in backdooring the gospel, which again, if that's other people's methods, that's okay. But I think for us personally, we just felt like we want to be very upfront. But we're also not weird in how we share or do our meetings or.
But I think that goes back to authenticity, which was what you're talking about. That's how you started. That's how you've continued. It's just always been you. What's awkward is when people do this big shift, because then people don't know who are you really?
Mhm.
Is this a bait and switch? What's going on here? But figure out who you are and then be that same person consistently.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've never shared this story publicly, but I've been in the hoods and Compton, South Central, that I sat across for 2 hours from Donald Trump Jr. and had dinner, had a very small private dinner, and I talked to him. I shared what I did, and in high schools and Jesus, and over a steak. It's just it's the same to me, whether it was a kid in the hood or the president's son. I mean, it's to me, it's all people are people. And I would treat, a celebrity. I just had dinner a month or two ago with Brian Headwatch from Corn. Everybody's coming up to the table, you're Brian. To me, I'm just hearing about his car, or talking about crypto, or, just random stuff like, or, ever stuff with a band. It'd be the same for me, talking to a kid, in high school, or, a pastor. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so shifting and getting a little bit practical, when you think about the different social media platforms out there, do you think there are any that are particularly effective for missionaries, or how would you kind of weigh them against each other for people who are thinking, which one is best for me to get on?
I think Instagram is a good neutral. Younger people are on TikTok.
Mhm.
Hope this doesn't offend anyone watching. Older people are on Facebook. So I always can count on my grandma liking my pictures on Facebook.
You just saying the stats. This is what the stats show.
Yeah. I think Instagram's a good, safe place to plant your flag. I think every social media platform has a shelf life unless they miraculously pivot.
Mhm.
So I think YouTube is great for those I haven't gotten into that space much, but it's an awesome platform.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's your preference, your choice of what you think would work and working that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you kind of brought up who's on different platforms. So maybe it's worth researching and saying, hey, who am I trying to reach? And what platform are they on? It's
Mhm.
my best chance of connecting with them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so for you guys, Instagram felt like a good neutral place.
Instagram was a really good neutral place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's interesting talking to people how everybody kind of has a different platform that's their personal favorite. How do you decide when new ones come out, whether you should hop on or not? Like I know Threads came out, now there's like Blue Ski. I mean, there's always something new coming out.
I haven't gotten anything new in a while. I've never really done Snapchat. Twitter, not a big, or X, sorry, not a big X fan. They're great platforms, just haven't dabbled too much. Instagram and TikTok are kind of my go-to.
Yeah. So I know you have a social media team too that helps you with all this as well. Do they have any like tools or apps that they swear by that are really helpful for them in putting it all together?
The guy who has the most following, 1.6 million, records and edits on his phone.
Okay, and explain a little bit more about that, because you have people within the Jesus Clubs, right, who have it's the Jesus Clubs, but it's also their own platforms at the same time. Share a little bit about that.
So the Jesus Clubs is an umbrella. It's an idea. It's a vision of everyone has the opportunity to hear the gospel in their teen years. So the Jesus Clubs is made up of thousands of voices and people. And when people say, well, how do you control that? How do you control the content of it? We don't try to. What we do is we uphold our culture enough to where if something doesn't look like us, people can identify that. So if someone comes and they say, we are fully LGBT affirming, we're Jesus Clubs, they say, well, I think Jesus Clubs has a little bit more of a traditional stance on marriage. I think they're able to decipher that because you can't control social media. You can't control, somebody in another country starting a modern day page and DMing, or you can't control that. What you can do is make sure that you are legit and authentic in what you're creating. And so I don't know, I think, kids now are starting their own social pages. You go on Instagram, type in the Jesus Clubs, there's pages from all over the country that we don't run, that they run. It's their page and they post, and it's awesome.
And so it sounds like they're all doing it in different kinds of ways.
Absolutely.
So you have some that are more like studio professional, some that are more raw.
There's not like a template that we have, because Gen Z is very creative and very unique. And I think giving them that opportunity has been the best thing.
So for you and for everybody that that's on social media, how do you think people can not get sucked in and get addicted to their phones as they're posting all this, and keep that healthy balance between putting things out there and also living in the real world?
See your phone as a tool. You wouldn't walk around with a shovel. You wouldn't stare at a wrench or a screwdriver. It's a tool, or a broom. Your phone is a tool. It was never meant to replace human interaction or take away from the best moments. I think in this last season too, I've chosen not to post much of my kids, or just because I feel like it, sometimes those moments you miss because you're trying to capture it instead of just enjoying it. And you got to remember, I was the generation, I'm a millennial. We were the last generation that had no technology into technology. I still remember pagers. I remember payphones. My grandma had
the rotary phone.
The rotary phone with a long cord for privacy into the garage. I had a TV that you pulled out the knob and you had 12 channels on it that you turned. With bunny ears, and illegal cable boxes and all that good stuff. So I feel like the technology piece, they're tools. It was never meant to be the thing. And so but again, if you're saying, well, I'm addicted, because you were addicted probably long before that to something. And I just think it's a bigger issue. It's like, what do you do if you just keep getting sucked into scrolling? I don't know. Ask the Lord, man, is there a desire in my heart for entertainment? Like, could you help me be entertained by you?
What are some of the other boundaries? You mentioned a few. What are some of the other boundaries that you have in place to keep yourself from being on there too much?
Don't sleep with your phone. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a hotel traveling, and I'll just be bored or something, or you start watching funny videos. I personally like watching videos of police stops. People who know their rights, just random stuff like that. I just, you can get sucked in sometimes. 20, 30 minutes has gone by. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
There's things you could do on your phone to see how much time you're spending on apps. But again, bottom line, I think if your phone is an escape for you, there is just a deeper issue.
Yeah. What do you see for the future of social media, especially as it relates to evangelism and missions? What are you guys guessing is up ahead?
I think social media, at least for the next years to come, 5, 10 years, I think the Lord will keep breathing on it. I think people thought it was going to replace in person until COVID lifted. And obviously you can tell there is a big longing for in-person gatherings.
Oh, yeah.
But I do think it's not something that shouldn't be stewarded. I think people have said, should I do this or this? Should I do in person or social media? And I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and.
Mm.
How do I do what I do in person and steward social media?
And what would you say to somebody who, again, is kind of just getting started and not knowing where to begin? So you mentioned Instagram could be a good place for people to start, or we talked about, researching what would be a good platform. What would be a few other next steps they could take to just begin that process?
We have an app called the Jesus Club. It's free. And there is actually an online training people can do
Oh, cool.
that teaches them how to use TikTok. Some of the stuff might be a tad bit outdated because they update the app and stuff, but the general idea is there.
Yeah. So just put something out there.
Put them out there.
Happens.
Learn how to edit.
Yeah. What's your prayer for missionaries in this space?
In the digital space or in general?
Let's do both. Let's start with digital.
I think my prayer in the digital space is that they would steward it. It wouldn't just be something they did in their younger years. I think in general, my prayer for missionaries, including myself, is that we make it. We make it to the end. We live faithful. We love the Lord. If there's moments that are weak or hard, we endure and we finish our race.
What a great note to end on. Brian, how can people find out more about the Jesus Clubs, Dingy for Jesus, all the things?
Yes. Social media. Go on.
I'm surprised.
Any platform. You can go type in the Jesus Clubs on the App Store. You can go on Instagram, TikTok. You can type it in and you'll find something there.
Yes. And then you've got Don't Scroll, Legends Die Young, and the Jesus Clubs, which people can pick up to find out more of the story.
Yes.
So, and you pull it, I love I was reading Legends Die Young, you pull it in other people's stories as well, which was fun. I got to read a clip of Heidi Baker's, the guy from Korn, I'm spacing on his name.
Brian Welch.
Yes, Brian Welch. So other stories in there which kind of illustrate those as well. Thank you so much for all that you do, and thanks for speaking into our missionaries today.
Thank you so much for having me.